one of these billionaires named Chamath Palihapitiya, he is, we're actually both from Ottawa. And we don't really know each other, but we're the same.
Jesse, are you trying to claim him as a friend? Is that what's happening?
We're both from Ottawa. We were born in the same year, and he, when he was in high school, he worked at Burger King, and I worked at Taco Bell. Wow. So we were competitors. I like to think of ourselves as competitors.
Yeah.
I like to think of Chamath and I as competitors.
And I think you're winning. I think you're winning though, Aaron.
Totally. Yeah. But so you mentioned it, like there's so much to be gained from doing this empathetic thing and saying, okay, what's going on in that world? And Chamath has gone on television in the past month and has very succinctly described some of the things that have been happening in the billionaire world and criticize it. And so here's a clip of him on CNBC earlier this month.
The CEOs of companies and compensation committees of most boards have been engaged in a game. And this game is all about working compensation around earnings per share. And even when earnings would not naturally go up, they were able to juice earnings per share by reducing share counts. They did that by getting levered and doing buybacks. That enriched CEOs, it enriched board directors, and it enriched the hedge funds that activated for those changes. That's all it helped. And the problem with that is that now we have a whole bunch of companies who've, frittered away tens and hundreds of billions of dollars on buybacks when they should have been saving it for a rainy day, investing it in R&D, or doing something that was much more important than what they did. There needs to be consequences for those actions. Not a single person went to jail in 2008 in Wall Street and in that financial mechanism. And in return, what happened was Main Street was decimated, the opioid crisis was created, the wealth gap was exacerbated. You can't go through this again. And we have a responsibility this time around to learn from what we did wrong the last time. You can't just bail folks out financially for being financially greedy. It's unfair. And the American people have a right to demand that you cannot run leverage this way. It's like giving a baby a loaded gun.
Chamath, I'm going to leave it there.
So there's a lot of jargon in there, and but I think the core of it is that he's describing in the terms of his world the connection between the massive increase in inequality and wealth that we've seen since 2008, like exactly how that mechanism worked at their level, at least at the billionaire level, and how it's connected to their need for this massive bailout. So basically, he's talking about how these hedge funds and different banks and things like this got heavily leveraged again, which means that they borrowed a lot of money and they gambled it on risky things like they did before 2008. And they found new ways of hiding it. And that the CEOs and the boards of directors of these companies got themselves increasingly more wealthy through this game where they tied their compensation or their wage, their income, to something called earnings per share. And then what they did is they would just cut the number of shares by using the profits of the company to buy back the existing shares. So reducing the number of shares, inflating artificially the earnings per share. So they would get massive bonuses and things like this. So that is what made these companies not have a rainy day fund, not be more resilient. And that's something that he talks about a lot. It's like this moment is that maybe we'll talk about in a bit. It's gonna be a shifting away from efficiency towards resiliency.
It speaks to that's only one of a myriad of financial tools and tricks and things at their disposal at any time. Mm-hmm. At any time in times of growth and positivity and expansion and benefit. And in times of difficulty, there's always an out or a way out. And when we talk about, I thought it was interesting. You said in terms of resiliency, it feels like in the podcast, the clips that you've been saying, there's this underlying didn't he say you got checks coming in and so there's a way of, and they want to do it nicely, but it's a way of suggesting, hey, Are you resilient? Can you muscle through this?
Oh, you're talking about
Here's
the
some toilet
landlords
paper.
to the renters.
The
Like,
landlords, yes,
like
exactly.
of course you should have a rainy day fund. Of course you should be prepared for this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, of course you're fine with that, right? Or
Yeah.
And so that's the tone there. And then up
Yeah.
top, it's a completely different tone, a completely different system.
In another interview with the same host on CNBC, Chamath actually laid out a pretty fascinating critique of what he calls Wall Street's big lie.
Are you arguing to let airlines, for example, fail?
Yes.
Why? I mean, how does that make sense in the broader scheme of the economy?
Because when you look at what it means, this is why I'm saying, like, this is a lie that's been purported by Wall Street. When a company fails, it does not fire their employees. It goes through a packaged bankruptcy, right? If anything, what happens is the people who have the pensions inside those companies, the employees of these companies, end up owning more of the company. The people that get wiped out are the speculators that own the unsecured tranches of debt or the folks that own the equity. And by the way, those are the rules of the game. That's right.
Why does anybody, I just don't understand, why does
you.
anybody deserve, using your word, to get wiped out from a crisis created like this? How does anybody deserve to get wiped out?
Well, but just be clear, like, who are we talking about? We're talking about a hedge fund that serves a bunch of billionaire family offices. Who cares? Let them get wiped out. Who cares? They don't get to summer in the Hamptons. Who cares?
I mean, there are
But if
people.
you
You don't think the employees?
hold on, Scott.
You don't
If
think
you
the
get a
employees
clean
of these
cap table-
companies own stocks? I mean, own their stocks, own the company's stocks?
You can look on Bloomberg and you can see what percentage of these companies are typically owned by. These things are owned by BlackRock. These things are owned by these huge, amorphous organizations. Ultimately, downstream, and the employee owns a few $100s or a few thousand dollars of shares.
Well, I just don't understand.
So
This is like a natural disaster. And why does anybody deserve to get wiped out? Wouldn't that be immoral in and of itself?
No, because what's happening right now is what I'll tell you is on Main Street today, people are getting wiped out. And right now, rich CEOs are not, boards that had horrible governance are not, hedge funds are not, people are. And what we've done is disproportionately prop up and protect, poor performing CEOs, companies, and boards. And you have to wash these people out.
What I'm hearing there, and what I see in the guy's face, the journalist who's completely beside himself and can't fathom that someone would come on his airwaves and say such blasphemous things, is there's an assumption that, again, before the crisis, everything was fine. So this is a natural disaster, he claims. And it brings me to our conversation that you did with existentialism. There's an absurdity. There's a constant absurdity that exists when you're born, let's say, in a social and political and economic condition where your everyday life is a challenge. And he's unfamiliar with that absurdity in the norm a year ago, 2 years ago. And so here he's just completely shocked that we could say that anyone should be harmed. Well, people are harmed all of the time, and those people are especially harmed in this moment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And even if, let's say, the government was to give money to everybody right now, right, including the hedge funds and all this stuff, this moment is increasing inequality. And outside of poverty, like discussion around poverty, like even without abject poverty, where everybody's fed and everybody's housed and whatever, inequality is a threat to society in and of itself. Like inequality is the highest correlating factor across societies with violence, for example, with crime. It's not poverty, it's not abject poverty necessarily, it's inequality. It has a psychic effect on us when we live in a world where we see these people with incredible amounts of wealth, showing it off, flaunting it in our faces, and we don't have access to it. It has a psychic effect on people, and it makes life unhealthy in a lot of ways. And so it's something to fight against in and of itself.